welcome, dear readers and listeners. On behalf of Authority Magazine, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome with me my guest today, Kristina Mänd-Lakhiani. How are you, Kristina?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
It is an absolute pleasure to have you here. So Kristina is the co-founder of Mindvalley. She is an entrepreneur, a speaker, international speaker, author, and so many other things. And Kristina, I'm so excited that you're here and you get to share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you are changing the world every single day. So thanks for making the time to be with us.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, it's, it's part of the work. I mean,
So
if you want to change the world, you need to speak.
Right, you need to share the story and empower others. Yes. Kristina, let's start by you telling us a little bit about your story, your childhood, where you come from, and what has brought you to this point in your life.
Well, that's a long time ago, if we start with my childhood, but for the context, because a lot of, I mean, it's a little bit unusual background, I would say. I was born in Soviet Union, and I grew up in Soviet Union, and that actually decided a lot of my choices in my life. Obviously, it was a very different kind of world, but when I was a teenager, Soviet Union collapsed, and I happily went on with my plans. So I studied to be a civil servant and to work for the government, which I did at a very early age, also partially due to the huge change in the country where I was living. When you have the change of regime, then quite often the people who come to power in the new regime have to be the younger generation. So I started my career very early, and then at the age of 25, I married to a person from a different universe. So my ex-husband is originally from Malaysia, studied in US, living in US at that time. So after we got married, I moved to New York and pretty much had to start from nothing. And it just coincided that at the same time, my then husband was starting Mindvalley. And because I was still searching myself, when you change your environment very much, you keep some of the core of what you are, but you also have to adjust and change a lot. So since I was still searching, one of the things I thought was reasonable to do was to help my husband with his business. And that's how I ended up actually being a co-founder. It wasn't my choice, as in, my dream or something I wanted to do. It was more the circumstances. But I still kept thinking that I will do my own career in somewhere between government and social work. And I continued my education, but life proved me wrong and brought me back to Mindvalley.
Sometimes life has a funny way of taking us around and putting us where is the right place for us without
especially,
us knowing.
Especially if well, things do happen without our choice, but I believe you would probably also relate to that, because your country also experienced a huge transformation when Soviet Union collapsed. So it's, you don't always choose. I'm quoting Gandalf now. You don't always choose times when you live in, but you always get to choose what you do with the times that are given to you.
I like that quote. Speaking of, I do come from Eastern Europe as well, from Bulgaria, and I can relate to the background that you come from. And tell me if you agree. I think sometimes in our time and where we grew up, there were not necessarily choices. There were a lot of things you had to do, and you had to do them a certain way. And I think that raises you with a certain mentality and mindset. For me and my journey, it took me on this tremendous transformation of discovery who I am, who the true me is, versus who I was told what I should do, how I should live, and all that. Let's talk a little bit about that, because you talked about changing countries and kind of starting all over and discovering a little bit more about you. Let's talk about discovering the authentic through you, and how that tied to entrepreneurship as well.
It's interesting that you put these two things together, because I absolutely agree with you. There were not many choices in this, Soviet bloc, if we can say so. The country was incredibly idealistic, and actually I don't think anybody had choices, even the people who were in the elite and who were the, as we thought, luckier ones, but still, it was such a restrictive society. We had prescribed future. But with that said, there is a lot of prescription happening in the free world, in the Western world, where we now found ourselves. It just happens slightly differently. Like if in Soviet Union, for example, you couldn't choose to be an entrepreneur, because if you did, you would end up in jail, and that was enforced by law. So it was kind of fear that made you do things that you were supposed to do. Now, in our current environment, and I believe we were majority of the people who are listening to that are living in well, let's say free world with market economies. We kind of have a choice, but subconsciously we are tempted to make the choices which are valued high by society. So it is quite natural that most people, subconsciously at least, are choosing something which they think will make them successful, will make them accomplished, admired. So we kind of have a choice, but there is, at least philosophically speaking, there is not so much choice in in what we do. So finding your path back to you is relevant, as relevant to the people who live in a free society, because in this race towards the accomplishments which are valued by society, we very often hush down our inner voice or our inner inclinations or what we think that would make us happy. So it's a combination of two. On one side, we want to be successful, so sometimes we pick things which we think will make us successful rather than the things that which we think that we'll enjoy. Of course, it comes with a huge layer of complication. But for example, the idea that you have to be successful, you have to sacrifice, you have to work hard, then naturally, you can't choose the things that you like because you think that's not going to bring you success, because success is supposed to be hard. But that's like we're digging very many layers down into the patterns. But in addition to that, there is also this idealism where we think that there's something wrong about choosing you, that this is somehow selfish and not right.
Yeah, that goes down deep into mindset. And that's why I say liberating yourself when you unleash all of those expectations that have been layered, whether they're by society or parents or teachers or whoever else, or the office environment. What does it mean to you to be authentic?
If you don't mind, I'll first comment on what you just said, and then I would actually venture to say that most of those expectations are subscribed to by you. And don't mean you in particular,
Yes.
because yes, the society may expect whatever they want from us, but it is only when you sign up to that expectation and say, yes, this is right, only then it becomes expectations that you abide by. Society might have, we all have been rebellious in certain aspects, and we actually, somewhere deep inside, I think everybody understands that you can be rebellious. Again, I have to make a distinction. There are people who live, I spent 16 years in Asia, and I know that there are societies which are much more restrictive. But most of us, we put those expectations on ourselves. When we say that, oh, but my husband expects me to do that. No, it's you chose to make this kind of decision. Or that, I have to do that for my children. All your children want is your presence, your love, your happiness. They don't want any obligations. In fact, being a martyr is a huge burden on the people for whom you sacrifice yourself. Huge burden. And we very often are mistaken about that. Sorry, I got distracted by this idea. But when it comes to authenticity, for me, authenticity is a relationship with yourself. And that's probably the shortest definition. It's being true to yourself, to your essence, to your values. So it's a relationship with yourself.
And you brought up to what you just spoke about. You talked about something else that's important, and that's choices, right? You said it's something you're subscribing to. Let's talk a little bit about authenticity and the power of choice.
Well, I think we always have choice, and probably it's not just me. Sometimes we think that our circumstances are very different. because we are so deep in it, and we very often think that, but I don't have a choice because. Now, I will actually venture to quote Viktor Frankl, and if you guys know who Viktor Frankl is, he actually is a very prominent psychologist writer, psychotherapist writer who experienced Nazi concentration camps, and in his work, Man in Search for Meaning, he actually wrote about how people in concentration camps had a choice.
Mm.
And it's such an interesting break of a pattern, because his idea was that everyone at every moment in your life, you have a choice. And again, this Gandalf quote comes back to me. You don't get, well, I'll rephrase it. You don't get to choose your circumstances. You choose how to react to your circumstances. Now, when it comes to authenticity, I believe it's relationship with yourself. And now I'll give you a slightly wider explanation. Now, if you look at any relationships in life, whether it's relationship with your lovers, partners, children, parents, friends, usually we understand that relationships require a few things to be thriving, to be healthy, to be good relationships, supportive relationships. And these things, well, in my very free interpretation, are probably being present, being committed, being, being compassionate, understanding. These things are important for a relationship to thrive. If we take relationships for granted, if we become, flatmates with our family members, and we are busy with our own lives, so we're not present in the relationships, or if we're not committed, or if we lack compassion, then it's a natural progression that the relationship will suffer. It will not be healthy. If we take the same analogy to the most important relationship in your life, relationship with yourself, it requires attention, it requires commitment, it requires compassion, presence, awareness. So for me, being authentic means having this relationship in a healthy state. So your relationship with yourself is good. And then you can be authentic, because you can be sincere and earnest in a relationship outwardly, if it's a healthy relationship, and if you have all those things present. And if you have a healthy relationship with yourself, then your only choice is to stay true to yourself.
Yeah.
Your choices become dictated by your essence, by your values, by things that are important to you.
Yeah. What do you think are barriers that people experience to being authentic today?
I think my first thought is that it's fear. We are afraid, because it's a leap of faith. We are so afraid to be rejected or laughed at. We do have this innate need to be loved and accepted, and it's actually much deeper than we realize, because it comes with our evolution from the ancient times, when being rejected meant being in danger of dying. So that fear of rejection is a very deep-rooted, very primitive fear, which is why it's so overwhelming. So because we are afraid of rejection, and because we need to be loved, it's scary to show yourself the way you are. Now, a very maybe extreme analogy would be when you start dating someone. Russians have the saying, it's the flower and candy period. When you start dating someone, you put on your best behavior. You try to be liked. Of course, biology helps along, and the person who's in love with you probably doesn't see you the way you actually are. But we put on our best behavior, and it's just so natural. But we know that someday you have to expose yourself. So I think this is the biggest reason why people are not authentic. They're genuinely afraid that they won't be accepted. And somewhere, maybe if we take it again, layers by layer, deeper, somewhere there is this fear that I'm not worthy of love. I'm not going to be likable. If people know who I am, if people know my flaws, they will condemn me. And the scariest thing is that we are afraid that if we face our own darkness, that we won't be able to like ourselves. That's a scary thing.
Yeah.
Because what if I discover about myself is so bad that there is no way I will convince myself that I deserve my own respect and love.
What is the flip side? What is the benefit if you are able to be vulnerable and authentic?
Well, first of all, authenticity doesn't require vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's probably completely counter to everything that people are used to. You can be vulnerable without being authentic, and you can be authentic without the need to be vulnerable. Now, of course, if you want to show the real you to the world, that probably is going to require an act of vulnerability. But if you remember how I define authenticity, authenticity is your relationship with yourself. The only definition of authenticity in science is actually in anthropology, and that means true to your essence.
Mm-hmm.
It has no bearing on the world outside. It doesn't matter, because it's your relationship with yourself, which is why vulnerability is by definition something with a direction, because you're vulnerable because you are in an uncertain situation. You do not know how the world is going to take you. So that's why I say that they are not as connected as we insist that they have to be. And I study mostly authenticity, not vulnerability so much.
So,
But the flip side is that it's not a flip. Once you try to be yourself, it's really hard to stop being yourself.
what do you think it does in terms of changing your relationship of you with the world and to the world and how you experience the world?
I think it's more of a consequence of becoming authentic. Your relationship with the world is a consequence of you becoming authentic. And here I need to throw another philosophical concept. Your relationship with the world is a reflection of your relationship with yourself. And well, I've been in personal growth for 20 years, and I've noticed that correlation. If you are kind to yourself, it's much easier to be kind to the world. If you are compassionate with yourself, it's much easier to be compassionate with the world. If you're a perfectionist, you require the same perfection from the world. So very often our relationship with the world is just a reflection of our relationship with ourselves. So how I use that deeply philosophical thought in practical life is that whenever I notice that I get triggered by something, and I get repeatedly triggered by the same things which are maybe inexplicable. For example, I start being grumpy or bitchy. For me, a little bit is fine, but if I start noticing that it becomes a pattern, for me, it's a red flag to sit down and ask myself, what's going on with me? What is so triggering in me? Because really, the world triggers me only to the extent that, I have discontent in me, except maybe for one big example, which just happened recently. And I hope you don't mind, I'll touch upon politics a little bit, but, when this big war broke out on our doorstep, I live in Estonia, I know there are sometimes big events in life which naturally elicit strong emotions in you. But even with that said, your reaction to those events can be so very different depending on your relationship with yourself. You can be to a greater, lesser degree at peace with the fact that things are not the way you would like them to be.
Yeah. And that can go into a whole other conversation of, sometimes it's, even you brought up the example of the concentration camp. We started with the example of Eastern Europe, when we say we didn't have a choice and maybe the choices were more limited, but you're right, we still had a choice of how we experienced the situation and the circumstances that there were. Yeah.
I'll tell a really silly fable. I hope you don't mind. So a journalist was interviewing two brothers who had a very different fate. One of them was homeless and addicted, and the other one was a very successful entrepreneur. And he asked the first one, so why did you end up like this? And he said, but my dad was, he was addicted to alcohol. He was constantly drunk. What did you think I would grow up to? Of course, I'm homeless and drunk. So the journalist goes to the second brother and says, so you're so successful, you're a businessman. How do you explain that? And he says, well, my dad was an alcoholic and he was constantly drunk. What did you think I would do with my life?
Yeah. Same situation, different perspective, different choices. The power of choice. Yeah. Kristina, you have some exciting projects, big projects in the works. Do you want to share some of those with us?
Oh, yes. The biggest thing this year is that my book is finally coming out. It's my first book, so I'm very, very excited, and I really wish my book baby a lot of success. So my book is called Becoming Flawesome, and it's about learning to know yourself, accept yourself, and love yourself, not despite your imperfections, but with them, and maybe even because of them.
Yeah. When do you expect the book to launch?
So the book is launching on the 13th of June in US, UK, and Australia, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, it's going to be all over the country.
Yeah. Do you know what it's going to sell? Amazon? What is it going to
It's
sell?
in all the major bookshops, because I'm doing I have a big publisher publishing it, so it's going to be of course in Barnes and Noble and Books A Million and Amazon, and in the airports, and in the bookshops in the airports. So yeah, it's going to be everywhere.
Congratulations on that, coming
Thank
up
you.
soon. Very good. Kristina, do you want to leave our audience with a favorite quote or piece of advice or anything that resonates with you, that keeps you positive and authentic?
So usually, I have so many thoughts in my head, so I take the first one that came to my mind, and that hasn't come to my mind in a long time. So I wonder why it came. I want to leave you with a quote from the Cinderella movie. It's a quote by Cinderella's mother. She said, "Have courage and be kind." And I think it's one of the most brilliant quotes.
I like it. Have courage and be kind. Wise words.
Yes.
Where can people follow your journey and find you online?
So I'm online everywhere with Kristina Mänd, and it's Kristina in Estonian with a K. Kristina, M-A-N-D, Kristina Mänd.com, /Kristina Mänd on Instagram, Facebook, and everywhere. So that's where you'll find me.
Yes. Kristina, thank you so much for your time and inspiration. I appreciate you making the time to be here with us. Wish you continued success and look forward to reading your book. Thank you.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Me too. Hope you guys enjoyed this. We'll see you next time. Thanks for checking in. Can't get enough of those rebellious conversations? Do make sure you subscribe, like, and share with your friends.